Hey everyone, welcome to Anime Dreams. This is your host, bringing you another exciting fanfiction adventure. Today's topic, what if female Naruto faced a dilemma? Part 5. Quick disclaimer. The content on this channel is purely for entertainment and discussion purposes. I do not claim ownership of any anime footage used, credit goes to the respective creators and copyright holders. Alright, let's dive straight into it. You wanted to talk to me, Whiskers? Bakugo's sharp tone cut through the air, his irritated red eyes fixed on Naruto. Naruto rubbed the back of her neck, hesitating under his intense gaze. The ongoing match between Uraka and Aoyama against 13 provided enough distraction for the others, making this an opportune moment to speak. Still, the tension Bakugo carried made her wonder if it was truly the right time. I want to explain why I never told you about being a kunoichi or a jinchuriki, Naruto finally said, her voice steady despite her nerves. She struggled to calm her racing heart. Why was it so difficult to confront him about this? Perhaps it was because she valued him more than she was willing to admit, maybe even more than Midoriya. Bakugo folded his arms, his scowl deepening. It was clear he was still upset about her secrecy. That was fair, she thought. As Shadow had pointed out, Bakugo was closer to her than most. They shared nicknames and playful banter. He even teased her about things like cuddling with Shadow, which always got a rise out of her. You have 10 minutes, Bakugo said bluntly, his tone leaving no room for argument. His gaze was unyielding, and the tension in his posture made it clear he expected a thorough explanation. Naruto took a deep breath, realizing this would be no easy conversation. Clearing her throat, she looked down at her hands, searching for the right words. She knew Bakugo couldn't fully understand the struggles of being ostracized, as he had been on the other side of the equation with Izuku. Still, she owed him honesty. I was never taught how to explain being a kunoichi to someone who wasn't one of us, she began, her tone measured. Her blue eyes locked onto Bakugo's fiery red ones. In my world, you could tell a shinobi from a civilian by the Hittite they wore. There was no need for us to explain, and frankly, I don't think there was ever a good time to tell you. She paused, reflecting on missed opportunities. The USJ attack? It had been too chaotic, and they weren't close back then. The sports festival? They'd been too focused on winning. The internship? They were in separate cities, consumed by their respective responsibilities. There simply hadn't been an ideal moment. And the jinchuriki part? Bakugo pressed, his voice quieter but no less intense. His narrowed eyes demanded an explanation, and Naruto felt the weight of her past pressing down on her. Memories threatened to resurface, but she pushed them aside. She was stronger now. It wasn't easy for me growing up, she admitted, forcing a small smile as she swallowed the lump in her throat. Hibiki Oji-san probably told you already, jinchuriki never have an easy life. I was no exception. People treated me like I didn't belong, like I wasn't even human, and I didn't understand why until I was 12. I was afraid you'd see me the same way. Bakugo's fists clenched tightly at her words, his shoulders trembling as his expression darkened. The raw emotion in his eyes resembled an erupting volcano. Why was he so angry? She had expected disappointment or frustration, but this fiery reaction caught her off guard. Suddenly, there was a loud crack as his fist collided with the wall. Naruto flinched but held her ground, unsure if she had made a mistake by opening up. Still, it felt right to tell him the truth. At least he wasn't looking at her with pity, an emotion she despised more than anything. Do you seriously think I'm like them? Bakugo snarled, his voice low but laced with fury. His trembling shoulders and fierce gaze bore into her, leaving no doubt that her words had struck a nerve. Naruto clenched her jaw tightly, her gaze fixed on the floor. Had he truly forgotten how he had treated Izuku back in middle school? She hadn't. The memories of him mocking Izuku's dreams were as vivid as ever, etched into her mind. It was impossible to erase the pain she had witnessed. Yet, it seemed as though Explosive Head had conveniently pushed those memories aside. Did you forget how cruel you used to be to Midoriya? She growled, her voice low and sharp. Bakugo blinked, caught off guard, as Naruto's piercing gaze bore into him. You hurt him every time he shared his dream of becoming a hero. And now, you claim he's your best friend? Tell me, how was I supposed to react when you treated him so horribly? Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She swallowed the lump in her throat, pushing back the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. He spoke as if earning her trust should be simple, but he didn't fully grasp the situation. If this was how he treated his best friend, how could she possibly believe he would act differently with her? That was something Bakugo needed to understand. Deku was being reckless, Whiskers, Bakugo muttered, his voice edged with frustration as a scowl crossed his face. If he tried becoming a hero without a quirk, he'd just be putting himself in danger. The pros would constantly have to save him. Don't be ridiculous by thinking the two of you are in the same boat. You've got a literal powerhouse inside you. Naruto blinked, caught off guard by his choice of words. A powerhouse? No one had ever referred to the Kyuubi that way. She instinctively placed a hand over her stomach and glanced at Bakugo, standing defiantly before her. His words, though harsh, carried a surprising undertone of reassurance. The scowl on his face wasn't his usual expression of fury but rather the irritated look he often wore when he was trying, awkwardly, to lift someone's spirits. A chuckle escaped her before it turned into full-blown laughter. The realization of what he was trying to convey hit her like a wave. Bakugo, now visibly embarrassed, looked away and rubbed the back of his neck. You know, Naruto said, her tone teasing, for someone trying to cheer me up, you sound like a real jerk. Don't put words in my mouth, idiot. He snapped, but the faint flush in his cheeks betrayed him. Smiling, Naruto felt her worries begin to fade. Maybe she didn't need to overthink what people would think about her. After all, Bakugo and Midoriya didn't know the Kyuubi's dark history or what it had done to her village, and perhaps that was for the best. Their reactions gave her hope that, even if the truth came out, there was still a chance for her and Gaara to find acceptance. Sliding her hands into her pockets, she offered Bakugo a grateful smile before heading back toward the control room. Once Uraka and Aoyama finished their tasks, they'd be free to leave. She had plans with Shoto for ramen later, and the thought filled her with quiet excitement. It would be just the two of them, and today, she intended to share more about herself. It should have terrified her, but things with Shoto were different. He was her best friend in this strange new world, someone who understood her without pitying her for the burdens she carried. Oi, Whiskers, what was your dad's name? The question stopped her in her tracks. She turned to face Bakugo, her expression shifting as the unexpected query hit her. Her father? Why would Bakugo care about that? Did he know something she didn't? I don't know, she admitted quietly. The confession felt heavy, and she cleared her throat to steady her voice. I've never had the courage to ask Kenji-sensei or even Jiraiya about him. The thought lingered uncomfortably in her mind as she walked away, leaving Bakugo to mull over her response. Neither of them noticed the wide, curious eyes silently observing their exchange. Later, at her favorite ramen stand, Naruto brushed her knee against Shoto's as she set down her chopsticks. Despite his usual stoicism, he had insisted on treating her. Mineta had tried to tag along, but a single cold glare from Shoto had quickly put an end to that idea. You were right, Shoto began, his voice even, when you suggested I talk to Yaoyorozu about my plans. Naruto arched a brow, folding her arms across her chest. Suggested? That's a little unfair, don't you think? I didn't order you to do anything. It was just a suggestion. Shoto's lips curved into a subtle smile, his mismatched eyes glinting with amusement. It sounded a lot like an order to me. Naruto opened her mouth to retort but quickly closed it when she caught the teasing sparkle in his eyes. For a moment, she hadn't realized he was joking. The realization sent a warm flutter through her chest. Smiling softly, she leaned closer to him, noticing the faint redness creeping into his ears. It was endearing, really, this quiet vulnerability from someone so composed. Well, she said, her voice light, if you keep teasing me, maybe I will start giving you orders. Shoto's faint blush deepened, but he didn't look away, and Naruto couldn't help but feel a newfound sense of comfort. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she truly belonged. "Are you teasing me, homeostasis?" she asked, her hand brushing lightly against his shoulder. Shoto neither nodded nor shook his head, but the visible gulp in his throat betrayed him. The heat radiating from his left side sent a shiver through her. Could a mere touch from her affect him this much? She knew he hadn't experienced physical affection in a long time, but his reaction was far more intense than she had anticipated. Shoto looked down at her, his heterochromatic eyes meeting hers. Slowly, he nodded. His gaze flickered from her bright blue eyes to her lips and back again. Was he remembering that kiss? The one where she had acted impulsively? Her body still burned with the memory of it, and her heart pounded against her ribs. Yet, she reminded herself to wait for him to make the next move. "Am I improving?" he asked, his tone earnest. The innocence in his eyes calmed her nerves, and Naruto's lips curled into a wide smile. That look reminded her of how little he understood the world around them. She inhaled deeply, leaning closer, her breath ghosting over him as her chest brushed against his. Now that she was nearer, the warmth emanating from his left side intensified, and Naruto steadied her trembling frame. "You're doing an amazing job, pretty boy," she said with a teasing lilt. Leaning back, she tilted her head, her blue eyes sparkling with feigned innocence. Shoto, however, seemed unconvinced, as evidenced by his raised brow. If anything, his eyes flickered down briefly before darting back to hers, his cheeks flushed with a faint pink hue. After a moment, he cleared his throat, locking his gaze on her blonde hair. The softness in his expression made her throat tighten. What was he thinking? Was it her compliment? Because, truthfully, he was attractive, objectively so. If she were inclined to poetic musings, she might have told him just how striking he was. "If I'm a pretty boy, then doesn't that make you a pretty girl?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. His eyes swept over her features, the sincerity in his voice and expression leaving her momentarily speechless. Nehire often told her she was beautiful, and Shoto had unintentionally mentioned it before, early in their friendship. But this felt different. The seriousness in his tone and the weight of his gaze told her he was fully aware of what he was saying. Her face heated, and she tugged at her uniform collar, suddenly self-conscious. I'm not that pretty," she stammered, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. She glanced down at her ramen, taking a steadying breath. "Nehire-chan and Yaoyorozu are much prettier. I don't deserve a title like that." Doubts about her appearance gnawed at her. Her mother had been stunning, and her father handsome, judging by the sketch Kenji had shown her. By those standards, she should have considered herself attractive, yet cruel words from her past still lingered. "You're just an ugly fox." Shoto regarded her for a long moment before setting down his bowl of ramen. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders, his thumbs tracing calming circles. Lowering his head slightly, he spoke softly, his breath brushing against her ear. "You're more beautiful than Hado and Yaoyorozu," he whispered. Her cheeks burned, and she turned to meet his gaze. His face was only centimeters away, his mismatched eyes piercing and sincere. "You're really beautiful, Naruto, and every guy here knows it. Why else do you think they keep looking at you?" Her blue eyes widened at his bluntness, and she glanced around. Sure enough, several of the boys nearby averted their gazes, as if caught in the act. Shoto wasn't the type to lie, he didn't have a deceptive bone in his body. His irritation only underscored his honesty, and it dawned on her that he disliked the attention she received from others. "Thank you, homeostasis," she murmured, her tone filled with gratitude. Her smile widened as she looked at the boy who had stuck by her side, even when she hadn't been at her best. Shoto hesitated for a moment, his hand twitching as though he wanted to touch her hair, but he quickly withdrew it. The uncertainty in his eyes made her heart ache. If he had reached out, she would have welcomed it. Naruto shifted her attention back to her ramen, savoring the warmth and the rare moment of connection with him. He was opening up in ways she hadn't expected, and the thought made her smile. Perhaps, when they eventually became something more, she could assure him that she wouldn't mind his touch. As she slurped her ramen, she could feel his gaze lingering. Was he judging her unladylike eating habits? He should know by now that restraint wasn't her strong suit. Are things between you, Midoriya, and Bakugo better now? Shoto asked, breaking the silence. Naruto paused, setting her empty bowl aside. His mismatched eyes were curious yet gentle. Were things better now? She tilted her head thoughtfully before nodding. I think our friendship is stronger than ever, she replied, taking a sip of her tea. A small smile tugged at her lips. At least now I can confirm I've only truly messed up one thing in my life. Shoto's concern deepened, and she could tell he'd caught the bitterness in her tone. His steady presence was comforting, and she knew it was time to open up about her past. Do you want to talk about it? He asked gently. Naruto closed her eyes, steadying herself, and nodded. Let's talk at my apartment. It's not something I want to discuss in public. She needed the privacy, and his understanding, to finally confront her demons. Akimoto Minato bore an uncanny resemblance to Namikaze Minato. Jiraiya's gaze lingered on the newspaper clipping, his eyes fixating on the image of a blonde-haired boy whose likeness to his former student was undeniable. The coincidence seemed improbable, yet an uneasy feeling had nagged at him ever since he crossed paths with Bakugo. The similarities between the boy and Naruto might have been mere chance, but the strange circumstances surrounding Minato's return only deepened the mystery. It became even more perplexing when an old acquaintance insisted that Minato's mother had been his wife, a claim that seemed implausible given their lack of familial resemblance. Jiraiya scrutinized the photograph of Akimoto Narumi, noting how her features, nose, chin, and eye color, mirrored Minato's far more closely. A curious case, isn't it? The disappearance of Akimoto Minato, an elderly voice interrupted his thoughts. Startled, Jiraiya looked up to see a kindly librarian, her appearance reminiscent of Sarutobi-sensei's later years. She settled into the seat beside him, her gaze resting on the photograph of the smiling boy in the clipping. It appeared the case was more well-known than Jiraiya had anticipated. Despite his extensive questioning, few locals seemed aware of the story. The library had been his last resort, but now it seemed like the lead he needed to untangle the connections. Smiling politely, he turned his attention back to the stack of clippings and the knowledgeable woman beside him. The detectives and heroes never found him, he remarked, gesturing to the array of reports spread before him. His tone remained measured as he picked up his notebook. Were there any leads? I'm working on a book about this case. The librarian's expression brightened at the mention of a book, her enthusiasm marking her as a literary enthusiast. Perhaps she held insights into the boy's disappearance, or even into the identity of a potential suspect. Jiraiya hoped his suspicions were unfounded and that his old friend hadn't done something reckless. If I recall correctly, Akimoto Narumi accused her son's biological father, the librarian explained, her brow furrowing as she scanned the clipping. It seemed like a credible lead since they had reportedly argued over custody, but no one could locate the father. Jiraiya nodded, thoughtfully rubbing his chin. Custody disputes could easily escalate into tragedy. He recalled Namikaze Soda's erratic behavior in the months leading up to his departure from Konoha for a supposed vacation. Perhaps Soda had been hiding a deeper secret, bringing his son home, away from the prying eyes of his peers. A pang of guilt surfaced as memories of his student flashed before him. Naruto's words rang in his ears, Jiraiya-sensei, you're more of a father to me than my real dad. Could this situation have been a missed clue? He retrieved an old photograph of Naruto, given to him by Mikoto when the boy was 6. The resemblance between Naruto and Minato was striking, unsettling Jiraiya further. If Soda had indeed taken Minato from his mother, why hadn't he reassured her of the child's safety? No, the librarian continued, her voice tinged with sadness. Akimoto-san never revealed the father's name in any interviews. Whenever she was asked, she would break down in tears. No one could fault her, Minato was such a sweet boy. Jiraiya glanced at the elderly woman, her sorrowful expression confirming that she had known the missing child personally. It made sense. If Akimoto Minato truly was Namikaze Minato, the boy's intellectual curiosity would have drawn him to the library, much like his older counterpart's fascination with Kekkei Genkai. Minato often visited after school with his younger sister, the librarian recalled, her voice soft. He was a kind child who loved reading to her and making up stories about heroes. Sadly, he also used the library as a refuge. He was frequently bullied for being quirkless. The revelation unsettled Jiraiya. If Minato had endured such bullying, it seemed unlikely he would have developed the admiration for Kekkei Genkai that defined his later years. He shook his head, trying to dispel his doubts. However, it was better to proceed cautiously. If there truly was a connection between Naruto and the Bakugo family, Jiraiya would need to handle the revelation delicately. This isn't like Minato, he muttered under his breath. If he were alive, he would have told everyone about Naruto, or at least informed his biological mother. Finally, he turned back to the librarian, his voice steady but probing. Is Akimoto Narumi still alive? The librarian nodded and studied Jiraiya for a moment before turning her gaze toward the window. Jiraiya sighed inwardly. He would soon need to ask her about the father of her first child, a conversation he wasn't eager to have. If this woman had even a fraction of Naruto's fiery personality, it would be a daunting task. After all, Bakugo Katsuki had a temper like Naruto's, and if those two were related, the temper likely originated from their grandmother. I can provide you with her address, the librarian finally said. But I should warn you, Narumi is a rather temperamental woman. Jiraiya frowned but nodded his thanks. You don't mind watching an action movie, do you? Naruto glanced over her shoulder at Shoto, who was seated on her couch. His mismatched eyes shifted from her bright blue gaze to the DVD case in her hands. Would he be okay with her choice? Her options were limited, considering her old-fashioned television set. She regretted turning down Jiraiya's offer to buy her a new one, her stubbornness getting in the way. A modern screen would have allowed her to offer him a better selection of movies. Shoto tilted his head thoughtfully before shaking it slightly. If it's what you enjoy, Naruto, I don't mind. Smiling, Naruto slid her favorite DVD into the player. It was an older film, a classic by many standards, though she always found it curious how an action movie could be considered a Christmas classic. Still, it was one of her all-time favorites. As the movie began to play, Naruto's thoughts wandered. How would she explain her recent struggles to him? She had spent the entire walk back to her apartment trying to form the right words. Finally, she took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady but tinged with regret. I made a mistake, a big one, on a critical mission, she admitted. Her gaze dropped to her lap. I failed to rescue my teammate and best friend. It's the reason I left Konoha. I couldn't face anyone after that failure. Shoto listened intently, his mismatched eyes filled with quiet understanding. His presence was reassuring, and Naruto felt a small measure of comfort as she continued. I did everything I could to stop him, to bring him back, but I still failed. It's been almost 3 years since that mission, and I still think about it every day. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to smile, brushing away unshed tears. It was behind her now, or so she told herself. Shoto moved closer, gently wrapping an arm around her shoulder. Despite the chill of his right hand, the gesture was calming. His warmth, both physical and emotional, eased the tremors that racked her frame. Everyone makes mistakes, Shoto said softly. His voice carried a weight of sincerity that Naruto couldn't ignore. Failing doesn't define you, it's how you move forward that matters. Naruto looked up at him, her blue eyes shining with gratitude. Others had told her the same thing, but hearing it from Shoto made it feel different, more genuine. She cleared her throat and nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. I should have seen the signs, she confessed. Sakura noticed something was wrong before I did, and I've known him the longest. I should have been more aware. Shoto tilted his head, considering her words carefully. No one can predict everything, not even a best friend, he replied firmly. You cared about him, and you did your best. That's all anyone can ask. Naruto closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. His words made sense, but the guilt still weighed heavily on her. His mother treated me like her own daughter, she murmured. After everything she did for me, I should have looked out for him better, especially after what happened to his family. Her voice broke slightly as memories of Mikoto's kind smile flashed in her mind. Shadow tightened his embrace, his warmth enveloping her like a protective shield. "It's not your fault, Naruto," he said gently. Naruto sighed, letting herself lean against him. Maybe he was right. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that, even just a little. Naruto lowered her gaze, staring at her hands. A sense of regret weighed heavily on her heart. She could have done more, learned how to create seals, been there for Sasuke in ways she hadn't thought of before. Perhaps, just perhaps, he might still be in Konoha. But deep down, she knew he was determined to leave. Once Sasuke made up his mind about something, it was almost impossible to dissuade him. Still, she couldn't help but think she could have tried harder. "I should have talked to him," Naruto said softly, lifting her head to meet Shadow's mismatched eyes. He continued rubbing soothing circles on her back, his touch easing the tension knotted there. "I should have reminded him of what his mother would have wanted for him instead of fighting him. Throwing the first punch was my mistake. I thought maybe a punch would knock some sense into him, but I was wrong." She sighed, her voice tinged with self-reproach. "I was an idiot." Shadow's expression remained calm, his eyes searching hers. He didn't reprimand her for thinking violence was the solution. Instead, his gentle touch continued to ground her, allowing her to voice the thoughts that had plagued her for so long. Ever since attending UA High, Naruto had realized how much she still had to learn. Heroes like All Might and teachers like Aizawa-sensei had shown her what it meant to truly connect with others, to resolve conflicts without resorting to violence. She cringed at the memory of her fight with Sasuke, guilt twisting in her chest. "I thought I could stop him," she murmured, her voice faltering. "I thought I could save him. But all I did was push him further away." Naruto felt a lump form in her throat as the weight of those memories threatened to overwhelm her. Even though her relationships with her team had been rocky at times, they had once felt like family, dysfunctional, but a family nonetheless. She closed her eyes, leaning into Shadow's touch as he combed his fingers through her tangled blonde hair. "What happened next?" he asked gently. Images of Sasuke's dark, frenzied eyes flashed in her mind, and her breath hitched. She hugged Shadow tightly, as if the warmth of his presence could stave off the shadows of the past. "We fought," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I used the Rasengan, and I tried to avoid his heart, but I shouldn't have tried to hurt him. He wasn't innocent either, he used the Chidori. If it weren't for the Kyuubi, I might not be here." The room's temperature seemed to rise, and Naruto felt the heat radiating from Shadow's body. She glanced up at him, noting the simmering anger in his eyes. His mismatched gaze burned with barely contained fury. "He tried to kill you," Shadow said, his voice low and cold. The icy edge in his tone sent a chill down her spine. Naruto placed her hands on his shoulders, meeting his gaze with quiet resolve. "I nearly killed him too," she admitted. Shadow clenched his jaw, his hands moving from her back to her shoulders. His frustration was palpable, but Naruto held firm. "You nearly died," he said, his voice trembling with anger. Naruto sighed, trying to calm him. She rested her forehead against his chest, hoping the gesture would reassure him. "I'm still here," she said softly. "If Sasuke had really wanted to kill me, he wouldn't have missed my heart." "Don't make excuses for him," Shadow countered, his voice sharp. Naruto took a deep breath, her mind racing. Was she making excuses for Sasuke? She wasn't sure. He had been her first true friend, and despite everything, she couldn't let go of that bond. She knew Sasuke wasn't beyond saving, but the wounds were still fresh for both of them. "I'm not excusing what he did," she said firmly. "But I'll be smarter next time. I'll do better." Shadow studied her intently, his frown softening slightly. "And if he tries to kill you again?" Naruto hesitated, her heart aching at the thought. She couldn't promise him that everything would be fine, it wouldn't be fair to lie to him. But she also couldn't abandon her hope of bringing Sasuke back. "You don't have to worry," she said, her voice steady. "This time, I know what I'm doing. I'll be careful, Shoto." Shoto's expression remained conflicted, but he didn't argue further. Naruto felt a wave of gratitude for his concern. He cared deeply for her, and that meant more to her than she could express. As they sat together in the quiet room, Naruto allowed herself a moment of peace. She had made mistakes, but she was determined to learn from them. With Shoto by her side, she felt a renewed sense of strength to face whatever came next. "How can I not worry?" he finally asked, his voice filled with sincerity. Naruto looked up into those intense eyes, and her breath caught as she noticed the raw emotions reflected in them. "I care about you, Naruto, and I don't want to see you hurt because of him," he said, his tone unwavering. She stared at him, her heart racing as his words sank in. Time seemed to slow as an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. Could this be a confession? His eyes held a seriousness she couldn't ignore. Her stomach fluttered with nervous energy, and she instinctively reached out toward him. Should she say something? Or would that make things move too quickly? "I truly care about you, Naruto," he repeated softly. This was not how she had pictured getting Shoto to express his feelings, but it felt undeniably real and heartfelt. Dear YouTube community, that concludes today's content. If you enjoyed this video, kindly subscribe to the channel for more engaging content. Thank you for your support. With gratitude. Anime Dreams.